Here's 13 things the One Piece anime got wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean mistakes. Big mistakes. And we're going to start with a very recent mistake which blows my mind. As you may or may not know, a lot of One Piece is on Netflix now, which is good and everything, except for when it isn't. Like this case, where at the end of the Paramount War, Trafalgar Law appears to save Luffy, and the Netflix subtitles introduce him as Trafalgar D. Waterlaw. A good 200 episodes before anyone was meant to know that. And here goes another. In episode 59, during a filler arc featuring an obese Marine Commodore named Nelson Royale, the Straw Hats find themselves trapped by Marine ships, all connected by these like super strong steel chain things. Bad situation because this was pre-Thousand Sunny, meaning we can't just over them. So how do we deal with the steel? Well, Zoro volunteers, even going on to say, there's nothing I can't cut, and that's exactly what he does. He cuts the steel chains and it's not a problem. And that's a problem. Because at the pointy end of the Alabasta arc, Zoro faces off against Mr. One, a man who can turn his entire body into an assortment of steel shapes and weapons. And the whole point of this fight is to put Zoro in a situation where he has to push himself. Push himself to overcome something we previously thought was impossible, at least in the manga. And anime watchers will probably be a bit confused and not really understand what the big deal is because they've already seen Zoro slice through steel like a hot knife in butter. Even though it's a pretty major mistake, I do have to give the anime some credit here because this filler episode aired in February 2001, and Zoro's fight with Mr. One would only happen in July-August of the manga later that year. So there's no way they could have known that such a small act would have had such a huge impact on Zoro's character. I mean, at this point, Zoro has been slicing stuff like bullets and cannonballs in the manga, so a steel chain wasn't the biggest stretch in the world. But then Eiichiro Oda said, lol no, and has made the Toei anime look like fools. And it's far from the only time. In that very same filler arc, the Straw Hats meet a dragon named Ryu, Ryu meaning dragon. So the Straw Hats meet a dragon named Dragon. And he was a nice guy, dead now unfortunately, but fortunately has since reincarnated. And either way, he leaves a truly interesting legacy that we wouldn't truly understand until Punk Hazard. Pretty much the very first thing the crew discover on Punk Hazard is a dragon, and his name is also Dragon, Dragon number 13. And this wouldn't be such a big deal if Luffy and Zoro didn't make such a big deal about it, with Luffy saying, huh, do those actually exist? And Zoro replying with, no, I thought they were imaginary. They can't be real. Which, in the anime continuity, makes no sense. Because one of the very first things the crew saw on their adventure was a dragon. In fact, the crew encountered a dragon before they even got into the Grand Line. So according to the anime, dragons are so mundane that you can even stumble upon them in East Blue, the most peaceful of all of the seas. And poneglyphs are also surprisingly much more common in the anime than you may think. In episode 102, Luffy, Zoro, and Chopper get lost during some Alabasta filler material, during which they fall down a big ol' hole, and the first thing they find is gasp, a poneglyph. And this is big stuff, because this is the first time that a poneglyph has ever been seen in the One Piece anime. This is their introduction. They even have Zoro linger on it for a second to give you that sense of narrative importance, before they promptly abandon it. But we now know that there are only 30 poneglyphs scattered throughout the world, each of which contains integral information to uncovering the lost history of the planet. So it was a very bold maneuver for the anime to create a 31st filler poneglyph, and it resulted in a lot, and I mean a lot, of anime-only watchers being absolutely determined that we will go back to Alabasta, because we have to. There's another poneglyph there that Robin hasn't read yet. But this poneglyph doesn't actually exist. It was something inserted by the Toei filler team to foreshadow the eventual poneglyph reveal without knowing how important each and every single stone is. Now, you might be starting to see a bit of a pattern here. It's a very simple pattern. What happens is, whenever the One Piece anime makes some filler content, they end up doing something that wildly contradicts the manga down the road. And these days, sometimes it's even done on purpose. Like the director of One Piece film Red coming out and saying that there are some deliberate fake fighting styles amongst the red hair pirates in that movie, so as not to spoil what they do in the actual story, which is fine. But on other occasions, this is definitely not the case. And on these such occasions, the anime team unfortunately do what I lovingly refer to as shitting in the milk. Such as during Wano, when Basil Hawkins revealed that the chances of a certain man living until morning were 1%. Now, I don't know what possessed the anime to do the thing it is they did next, because when this moment was adapted, they removed all vagueness and had Hawkins blatantly state that the man he was talking about was Diaz Drake, only to be ultimately contradicted by the manga when Hawkins later reveals that the answer was himself. It's just creating unnecessary problems. The author author kept the answer to this mystery vague for a reason. And what the anime did was essentially canon theory crafting. They, to be fair, like the rest of us at the time, assumed that the man was Drake, but why take that next step and put it into the actual show? You'd think that they must have consulted with Oda before doing that, and maybe they did, and maybe it's actually Oda's fault. Maybe he changed his mind and that stitched them up. But that's all the more reason just to keep it vague and not do this in the first place. But we can't always blame the anime for their errors, such as in The Diary of Kobe Meppo, which is still one of my favorite cover stories to date, and also one of the very, very few that were lucky enough to be animated. However, cover stories are a very different beast. Rather than having the fully laid out storyboard of the regular manga, animating cover stories requires a lot more creative thinking to tell the audience how characters are getting from moment A to moment B, which opens the anime up to compromise. And in this case, we feast our eyes upon episode 69, the sex number episode, where Kobe and Helmeppo are taken into the Grand Line. We didn't see this happen in the manga, which means neither did the anime staff. So to bridge the gap, what we see is a newspaper featuring a photo of Kobe and Helmeppo entering the Grand Line via Reverse Mountain, which is a mistake, because we know that the Marines would never do that. Reverse Mountain, that is way too dangerous, especially when they have a much easier and more direct choice. Marines make their way around the world by sailing through the calm belts, because they have these special Seastone line ships that can cross the calm belts without activating the Sea Kings. But in the anime's defense, they didn't know that at the time. The only way that the anime staff had ever seen someone get into the Grand Line was via Reverse Mountain. So it's fair to think that you would assume that's how everyone else did it as well. So yeah, I think it was a reasonable assumption to make, but a retrospective mistake nonetheless. And Kobe's instructor Garp is hardly mistake-free either. So this one's pretty subtle, and I wouldn't blame you for not noticing it or not caring about it if you did. However, it does make you ask how the people animating it didn't notice and or care. In chapter 957, good old Sengoku dumps some lore on us, introducing the concept of God Valley and the Rocks Pirates. And within this big old dump, we have a short mental flashback featuring Gold D. Roger and Garp, the hero, joining forces to defeat said Rocks Pirates. You can see Roger here wielding his mighty sword, and Garp to his right wielding his mighty fistsome fist. Because that's the thing about Garp. If you know nothing else about him, you know that he's known for fisting people. In fact, one of his epithets is Garp the Fist, which is why it's very puzzling when this moment comes around in the anime and we have Sengoku, telling his lovely story. You see the Rocks Pirates and Roger, they all look perfect, no notes. But to the right of Roger, we have Garp the Fist wielding not that. He's holding a sword. And I'll admit that this is an error so small that it does deserve to be called a nitpick, but mate, I am going to pick the crap out of this nit because it's hard to see it happening by accident. Even if you forget that the character is literally called Garp the Fist, you've got the manga panel to work off, where he's very clearly making a punching pose. And I know sometimes the detail in the manga is so vague that I really don't envy the anime staff for needing to make sense of it, but this is not one of those occasions. And it just makes you ask why. Is it because the storyboard was done by someone who wasn't familiar with Garp, and everyone else was holding a sword, so I don't know, why not give him one? Or was this a more artistic decision? They drew Garp with the fist, and then in the framing, oh look, the fist, it doesn't look amazing, so we go with the sword. Nicer shape. Either way, it's the little things like this that break the immersion of the anime for me, and make me very hyper aware that what I'm watching is a production rather than a story. And again, that seems pretty overly dramatic for what is essentially a pretty unimpactful change. It really doesn't change anything. But I want to reinforce that what I do for a living is make videos about fictional pirates. Nothing I say matters. So let me have this one. As well as the next one, in chapter 723, the Straw Hats decide what to do with the charred, fulsome body of Jola, who they have recently defeated, and Nami comments that it would be cruel to jump Jola overboard, which Chopper agrees with because she's a devil fruit user and that would be a terrible way to die. Then Brook says that he has no desire to see her panties, but wait a minute, hang on. Don't let all that panty talk distract you from what Nami just said. She said that it would be cruel to dump a devil fruit user into the sea, and you know what, Nami? I agree. Kind of like that time that you pushed Eric the Whirlwind into the sea during episode 61, He was a devil fruit user and you quite gleefully ended his life there, something that we've investigated in Fictional Pirate Court in the 8 times the Straw Hats have killed people video, which I highly recommend you check out. But all this Eric stuff, it was anime only, and Nami, she's not always a nice person, but this gleeful murder is something that the anime definitely got wrong about her. And it's not just character quirks either, sometimes the anime gets general life facts wrong. To illustrate, whilst fleeing from Big Mom in chapter 875, Jinbei is able to stun Prometheus by firing water spears at him. And Luffy is very surprised that this works because Luffy doesn't understand anything. But Jinbei essentially replies with, "Lol, yeah, of course it works. Thanks. Prometheus is just a big piece of talking fire, mate. Of course, his weakness is water. And I want it known that Jinbei isn't pulling his punches here. He's doing the very polite Shark Daddy version of, yeah, no shit. So just imagine Jinbei's surprise when in episode 1027, Prometheus decides to go for a swim. In the anime, when Big Mom falls off Onigashima, she actually falls straight into the ocean, which, as we've just discussed with the Eric situation, is a bad thing if you're a Devil Fruit user. And I think the anime staff really should have thought about this one just a little bit better, because Prometheus was the only functional homie available to rescue Big Mom, because Napoleon, well, he's always pretty useless in these sorts of situations, so it had to be Prometheus to dive into the ocean, because the anime had to put Big Mom into the ocean. No, wait, they didn't. They didn't have to do that, but they did. And this wouldn't be such a big issue if it hadn't already been established in the manga that Prometheus was extraordinarily weak to even the mere suggestion of moisture. If this had actually happened, Prometheus should have been extinguished, and in the manga we never see Big Mom fall into the water, so it's implied that Prometheus caught her before that point. And then he asked for a cloud girlfriend, but everyone got defeated before they got to have their cloud babies. That's all reasonable. But I really don't know what the anime staff were thinking here. And this isn't one of my weird nitpicks that, the anime has contradicted something from manga panel, that one from thousands and thousands of chapters ago that doesn't matter. This is just fictional physics. Prometheus is fire and water is water. It's not ending well. And again, the craziest thing is that the anime didn't even need to do this. They made the decision to plonk Big Mom into the ocean for the sake of drama and wrote themselves into a weird situation as a result. The word result sounding a bit like salt, and you'll see why that's a terrible transition in a bit. Because before the end of the Water 7 saga, One Piece became something of a slice of life show for a few weeks, focusing on some more mundane everyday storylines, such as the episode titled Mothers Are Strong, Zoro's hectic household chores, which saw him put on a tight top that said mama and struggle with the daily tasks of being a parent. That was quite fun. And Sanji, of course, also gets a whole episode of his own which focused on salt. Yummy, yummy salt. Sanji discovers a delicious special salt on the Water 7 rooftops, which was delivered by Aqua Laguna, and heavily implied to have originated from the All Blue. Now, this one hasn't been contradicted in the manga yet, but look, I can just feel it. Whenever the All Blue is revealed, it's going to be a nightmare to explain how Aqua Laguna traveled from all of the way there to Water 7. So I'm putting this one in the video preemptively. Now, for a particularly picky one, in episode 196, G8 Vice Admiral Jonathan is playing a game of chess with himself, and in a rather bold maneuver, he moves the White King into a triple check, with the Knight, Pawn, and Black Queen all soundly guarding it. This is, of course, an illegal move. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter because it's all metaphorical wankery. It's supposed to represent the Straw Hats coming to the G8 base, where they are theoretically completely surrounded by Marines and therefore checkmate. But the wankery isn't the problem. The problem is this Black Queen, who in the very next shot becomes a White Queen. And that is not only illegal in chess, but also illegal in the general laws of reality, even in fictional pirate reality. And just to really rub it in, they also give us another close-up of the Queen as well. But animation errors are definitely some of my favorite things about the One Piece anime. They're absolutely meaningless, but they gift us a lot of fun. For example, I'm a particularly big fan of three-legged Marguerite, because it takes a bit to notice what's happening here, but that is definitely three legs, or a very popular fan theory, that Marguerite is just a well-equipped man undercover on the island of women. Then there's also the classic two-armed Shanks, and the similarly classic two Zoros in one shot. Oh, and also in episode 226, we are subjected to a six-toed Nami. And wouldn't you know it, that last animation error was picked up by far the quickest, because you can always trust the internet to put a weird focus on feet. But look, in the end, everything in this video is a pretty minor gripe. A lot of it's more funny contradictions that don't really have an impact in the grand scheme of things, except for this one. There is one time where the anime got something so wrong that it changed the message of an entire arc. Arguably the worst mistake the anime has made comes from episode 536, where we get an anime-only flashback for Hody Jones. And in this flashback, we see a group of human pirates having traveled to Fishman Island to catch some slaves to sell on the surface. And they end up capturing Hody's friend Dosen. Oh no, Dosen. So Hody and the rest of the squad, children as they are, jump into combat, but as I just said, they're children and so they get beaten up by all the humans. The humans then plan to take all of them as slaves, but the kids get saved by Arlong, and this is intended to explain why Hody idolizes Arlong and how his hatred for humans was seeded. And that seems pretty reasonable as a surface level idea. Humans did do that to Fishman, so it seems reasonable until you remember that it ruins everything that Hody Jones is meant to represent. The big revelation during the climax of Fishman Island is that when Prince Fukaboshi asks Hody what humans have ever done to him, Hody replies with the absolutely the chilling one-word answer, nothing. The point is that Hody is a phantom of the hatred of the past. He's the embodiment of what Fisher Tiger was afraid of passing on to the next generation. And that's why Fisher Tiger's last words were begging his crew not to tell people how he died. Because someone like Hody would go on to inherit the mantle of hatred and continue the cycle. Even though he'd never experienced any persecution himself. That doesn't matter. What Hody is meant to represent is blind hatred. But in the anime, he experienced it. Humans literally tried to enslave him as a child. So this isn't just a lol wrong chess piece color kind of error. Whoever wrote this anime-only scene had a fundamental misunderstanding of Hody as a character. And the anime isn't even consistent with itself, because when the big climax does come around, Hody says the exact same thing that he did in the manga, that humans have never done anything to him. They did, and we saw it, and it ruins everything. But you let me know in the comments if there are any anime mistakes I missed, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.